This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Len Testa, and this is our show for the week of Schmur's Day, February 16th, 2026. On the show today, multimodal transportation news, listener questions, surveys, and a new Disney patent application that might be for Piston Peak. Then in our main segment, Jim starts on the history of Hollywood Studios' great movie ride. Let's get started by bringing in the man whose public speaking teacher said, just be yourself, and now everyone's crying and he needs a lawyer. It's Mr. Jim Hill. Jim, how's it going?
Well, speaking of public speaking, Len, I may have misspoken myself last week when we were discussing Valentine's Day, and particularly the feast component associated with this holiday, because Sarah Hayes wrote in to say, hi, Jim and Len. I was listening to this week's Disney Dish and wanted to correct a minor misconception. The feast of St. Valentine's originally had nothing to do with eating. All days to honor saints in the Catholic Church are called feasts because of they come from the Latin root festus, which means joy. So the same root is festival. So congratulations, St. Valentine's Day. You're officially a saint. It only took decapitation to get there. Sarah goes on to say, as a lifelong Catholic and nerd who took Latin in high school, I knew the answer. And as a librarian, I also checked with the second source, my best friend and Disney Parks buddy, religious study professor Jill Peterfesco, who we recently had on the show.
Yep.
And so she wishes us both a happy Valentine's Day, however we honor him. And I want to say that there's a part of me that wanted this to be Johann Gutenberg's, fault. I picture him back in the 15th century. He's there working on a giant block of type, and an assistant runs in and goes, "We're out of A's." And it's like, and so Gutenberg, okay, cut all the A's out of the word feast. And then the assistant comes in and says, "We ordered too many T's. What am I supposed to do with these?" And Gutenberg's like, "New rule. From this point forward, omelet is spelled with two T's."
Yeah, I just think of the amount of influence that he had on that. Like a couple of typos and boom, the world has changed.
There we go. Anyway, thank you so much for Sarah reaching out. Appreciate that.
I wrote back to Sarah and I said, in your defense, Jim, this isn't the first time that the church could have been a little more clear about things to the laity. and left it at that.
There we go.
And speaking of listener shout-outs, let's do a shout out to all of our subscribers over at patreon.com/Jim Hill Media, including Carrie Thompson, Daniel Arendt, Patrick Barbie, Claire Cheatham, Edward KNG1, and Aaron Basta. Jim, these are the Universal Orlando team members reminding you that dinosaurs are reptiles who don't move fast in the cold. So your chances of a great visit to Jurassic Park are better than ever, as long as the dinos don't learn about electricity, or indoor heat, or find the gift shop sweaters. True story.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That I can just see it now, being taken down by a group of raptors dressed in really ugly Christmas sweaters.
Exactly. On to the news, Jim. The Disney Dish News is sponsored by UnlockedMagic.com from our friends at DVCRentalStore.com. Jim, walking improves your physical and mental well-being, so why not do a few laps around World Showcase? Our friends at UnlockedMagic.com have discounted theme park tickets, and then you can strap on your sneakers and get out of the house. Their ticket prices are better than Disney's, so visit UnlockedMagic.com now. All right, Jim, on to the news. Some minor news out of Walt Disney World, and one is that Imagineering has filed a work permit for Carousel of Progress. And Jim, I believe this might be related to the Imagineering announcement last year that we're supposed to be getting the Walt animatronic here at some point. Is this that?
Yeah, as I understand it, we now get a new opening scene for the Walt Disney World version of Carousel of Progress. Also, and this gets kind of challenging because they are also supposed to update the final scene of the attraction, which, and as I understand it, they're trying to keep Gene Shepherd in place as the narrator for the bulk of this attraction. But again, we live in an AI world, and it's like, and there are hours upon hours of Gene Shepherd radio broadcasts and that sort of thing. And evidently, Disney thinks it's possible to rejigger the end of the attraction and still have Gene Shepherd narration. So, going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think they could probably do it with AI or get something really, really close. I don't think most of us would be able to tell the difference. So, do we know what we're updating the last scene to? Oh. Like I've pushed for them to just go back to the 60s.
Well, again, it's the notion of it's like. We are now in 2026, and there isn't a piece of tech in that room that isn't at least 20 years out of date. So exactly. The feeling is that they do need to bring it forward, because otherwise it will just be a festival of complaining.
Right.
So it's just, but then it gets interesting because what's the balancing act? What can we have the daughter saying and doing today that isn't going to offend half the audience? So it's an interesting time. To be honest, I think this is one of the reasons why the company is putting Walt in the front of the show. It's like, look at Walt, enjoy him. Please ignore the changes we've made at the end.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what the changes are, and it's good that it's getting some attention finally. So I'm excited.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. It's at 93, Len, 93.
Amazing. I don't think I have socks that old, but if I did, it would be time to change them too. All right.
There we go.
All right, Jim, over at Universal. It's a day that ends in the letter Y, and you know what that means. Epic Universe has changed the attractions open for early park admission. This is a little rant for me, Jim, but okay. 3 weeks ago, January 17th, the early park admission lineup of attractions at Epic Universe was this. Mario Kart, Yoshi, Stardust Racers, Constellation Carousel, Monsters Unchained, and a Werewolf. So no Isle of Bark and no Harry Potter. Fine. And then Universal said at that time, for February, there would be select attractions open in Harry Potter and Battle of the Ministry, which means the ride, not Cirque Arcano, Super Nintendo World, and Isle of Bark, which means no Dark Universe or Celestial Park. Fine, right? If you're like me and you have to predict wait times, you have to know when the attractions are running. We took that into account. We changed our models. And then last Wednesday, Jim, 11 days into the month of February, which Universal said would be unchanged, Universal went back to the original January 17th lineup without explaining anything. So at this point, it's back to Mario, Yoshi, Stardust, Constellation Carousel, Monsters, and Werewolf. No Burke, no Harry Potter. Don't know what's going on.
Wow. Okay. Wonder what's going on there.
My sense is they're trying to change things out. And for our listeners who are going to Epic Universe in the next few weeks, just be prepared to have a backup plan in case some of those rides aren't open when we think they're open.
Wow. Okay. That's, especially mid-month, that's a little weird to do that.
It is.
Wonder what's going on there.
Also, Jim, another bit of news from Universal Orlando. Universal Orlando has selected The Boring Company for its next-gen transportation project in a memo sent out by the Shingle Creek Special District last week. So 3 companies applied for this. Remember, Jim, this is the project that's going to connect all of Universal's hotels and theme parks together with a dedicated transportation network. So 3 companies applied. The project was started last week, February 11th, 2026. Jim, it looks like the one project that the Boring Company has completed is in Las Vegas, which I think opened in 2021. It's around 2.2 miles of route at 35 miles an hour. A day pass to use it all is $5, but apparently the Las Vegas tourism organization is also subsidizing that, so it might be around $12. The total lifetime passengers on this thing is still less than any 1 year for the monorail, so I don't think it's getting a lot of use.
Okay.
But still, it's working. Also, it doesn't mean that this is going to be tunnels. Part of the Las Vegas operation is on surface streets, like the part that goes from the Strip to the airport. So it could be part tunnels, part cars. I will note, Jim, a couple of logistical things that people are going to inevitably point out. One is that Orlando is roughly 100 feet above sea level. and that the tunnels in Las Vegas are roughly 40 feet below street level. So we're getting kind of close to our margin of error for the water table. Also, I don't think the ground in Orlando is same as the ground in Las Vegas. Obviously, there's sand in both places, but I think that the underlying rock in Florida is more porous than the mountain rock in Las Vegas. It probably contains more groundwater as well. So I think there are different geological challenges here. We'll see how they plan to deal with this. But don't be surprised if a lot of this is on the surface transportation, not underground.
On the other hand, Len, I just love the name of the Boring Company. I mean, I just picture the lobby there with magazines, from 1960s,
Exactly. Yeah, Jim, it's a bunch of highlights magazines, but with all the pages colored in, right?
There we go.
All right. Two other bits of industry news. After last week's show, where we mentioned some possible candidates to replace Josh D'Amaro as the chairperson of Disney Experiences, we have another name to watch, and that is Natasha Rafalski. She is currently the president of Disneyland Paris and has been that president since 2018. She's been with Disney for 31 years. She was previously the CFO and SVP of Disneyland Paris, so she has that finance experience that Disney likes. Before that, she was the CFO for Greater China, which included Shanghai, and before that, a VP in finance. She's got undergrad degrees in math and economics and an MBA, all from UCLA. So I think this kind of makes sense for a couple of reasons. One, as our friend Jim Scholl points out, she's currently leading the €2 billion expansion of Disney Adventure World, which opens next month. So she's led a billions of dollars resort-wide construction project. She has international park experience that would be a compliment to Josh D'Amaro. I mean, so figure if Josh is going to be based in Burbank, he's a short drive away from Disneyland. Doesn't need anybody to help with that. He's also a short flight from Walt Disney World and was most recently in Walt Disney World, right? So he kind of has the domestic park experience. The international thing would sort of complement that. Also, Natasha has managed the rollout of dynamic pricing for hotels and tickets. And that's coming to domestic parks. And she seems to do like the non-glamorous things well too. So Disneyland Paris under her watch, made some advances in sustainability, adding solar, electric, and thermo-refrigerating technology to the resort. And she seems to be pretty good with investor relations. The Wall Street people I've spoken to about her seem to have a very high opinion of her. So
and not for nothing that if they opted to do this, she would be the first female VP of this division of the company. Is that right?
Yeah, first woman over the parks. Yeah. So okay. I don't know that that's going to really count for anything. I think the finance and the park experience stuff is obviously going to be the vast majority.
No, absolutely, but certainly couldn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. I don't think so. Yeah. So
okay.
We'll see. All right. One other bit of information. This comes from Christina Harrison for touringplans.com. And Chrissy was looking at the lineup for the Garden Rocks concerts and noticed something interesting, Jim. The thing she came up with was that the big name acts, if you will, are only appearing Friday through Monday at Epcot, and they're filling in the weekdays. So the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday section with local acts. And so I actually to test this, I put the entire Garden Rocks lineup into the show notes, and I noted the weekdays that each of these things were running. Yeah, and yeah, it seems to be true, except for a very few exceptions. The vast majority, like 85% of the big name acts appear on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So if you want to see something like Rick Springfield or Air Supply or Flock of Seagulls or Queensryche, you're going to have to come on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday for that. Which makes sense, right? I think weekend crowds are bigger because of locals, right?
You're not wrong. I just this is interesting to look at, from a budgetary point of view. I mean, with the notion that entertainment has a finite amount of money in regard to these Garden Rocks concerts. So that's good of Chrissy to have caught that.
Yeah, I thought it was really impressive, and it seems to make sense. Like I said, I have all the dates in the show notes. Fair. Okay. All right. One more thing for the industry, and this is an appeal to our listeners. If anyone knows what Project Atlas is, send me an email, please, len@touringplans.com. So that's Project Atlas. And I'm not referring to the Family Guy thing because I know what that is. This is not that. Project Atlas. If you know what it is, let me know.
Okay.
All right, on to surveys. Jim, Thomas sent in a Hollywood Studios survey with an interesting set of land names. And I put the map from the survey in the show notes, as well as the map that Disney is currently putting out at Hollywood Studios. And Jim, in the show notes, you'll note that in this survey, Disney refers to the left-hand side of the park as east side of park. It's not Echo Lake. It's not Commissary Lane. It's not the Baseline Tap House Grand Avenue area, right? And that's interesting because that section of the park has the three separate names. I don't think any one of us would have batted an eye if they just called the whole area Echo Lake on the survey, right? So why call it east side of the park here?
Wow. Well, I guess what kind of intrigues me is that the imagery you shared with the show notes here also shows that, for example, Hollywood Boulevard also has kind of a generic name as well.
Front of the park.
Front of the park. So front of the park, east side of the park. So those are kind of, bland. And I'm intrigued because, the company is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to redo both, the animation, old animation courtyard into a recreation of Burbank's, animation building. Likewise, Muppet Studios is being transformed into Monsters Land. It's just, those seem like very specific redos, that'll have, very distinct names. And these are, that place over there and the other place.
Yeah. East side of the park is not exactly descriptive.
No.
And I mean, and it's technically true, right? Even though in the map, it's the left, which you would consider west side of the map. It is geographically east. So give Disney credit for proper nomenclature there. Yeah. I don't, is this one of those scenarios where we're going to get, at some point, different names for different lands in the parks like we did in Epcot?
You gotta wonder. I mean, again, the interesting thing is that, again, when the animation courtyard comes online and when Monsters comes online, coupled with the Muppet re-theme of Rock and Roller Coaster, in a weird sort of way, the studios gets to sort of relaunch itself. And I've also been hearing that on the heels of what's happening in California with Galaxy's Edge, with the whole, Luke, Leia, Han, Darth Vader thing. They're going to be watching that very closely this summer. And if that's as successful as the folks in Florida believe it will be, that's coming east as well. So, there may be an entire reset of Disney Hollywood Studios coming in, 2027.
Yeah. That'd be good. I wouldn't be surprised if they took that part of Rock and Roller Coaster once the Muppets are there, and then eventually the Villains show is going to go away, supposedly to be replaced by another Muppets attraction. They could call that Muppets Courtyard.
They could.
Not only would that be accurate in terms of naming, but it would give Disney the ability to say, "Hey, we've got another land in Hollywood Studios." Alternatively, I mean, they could just go the Epcot route and just put the word world in front of all of this. So World Hollywood Boulevard, World East Side of Park, World Sunset Boulevard. I'm just saying, Jim, it's been done.
You're not wrong.
You don't, sometimes you don't need to overthink things,
East Side of Park. Go over there. Okay.
All right, Jim. Wanda sent in a Disneyland survey with some interesting questions around how to get pass holders to visit Disneyland more often. And there's a couple of the example questions in the show notes. I want to go over a couple of them here. One of them is thinking about the following limited time benefits, regardless if you are aware of them or not. How would each of the following impact how you might visit the parks in the future? And so there's a series of options that you could select from. And the things that Disney wants to know is, would you add a visit that you hadn't planned just to experience this thing? Would you change the dates of an already existing reservation? Or would you not even go to the parks because it wouldn't change what you're doing? And so things like special events for Magic Key holders, such as themed events with experiences like photo ops, enhanced park experiences like special access to new entertainment offerings, special experiences of things like Festival of the Holidays, the opportunity to purchase special food and bev, occasional limited time discounts, PhotoPass opportunities, and Magic Key branded merchandise. And then there's a second question around that says this. Thinking about the last 30 days, which of the following describes how often you have made reservations? And so there's the options there are I've made fewer, I've made more, I've made the same, and then I haven't made any reservations yet. And Jim, if you mention that you've made fewer reservations than normal, there's a follow-up question that asks why. And I love that question because, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but Laurel and I are watching the TV series Smallville. And in the first couple seasons, the character of Clark Kent constantly wants to date another character named Lana, but is always breaking dates with her to save someone and then never telling her why he didn't show for the date. So like there's this constant like pull-push between Clark and Lana. And that just reminds me, like, gee, Disney, what possible behavior in your recent past would have made pass holders feel confused about how welcome they are in the parks? It's a mystery, Jim.
Yeah.
It's a mystery.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. My co-host over on Fine Tuning, Drew Taylor, Disneyland annual pass holder, and we were just on the most recent podcast, just out of the blue, volunteered about how he absolutely hates the reservation system at Disneyland. That it is made, something that he really enjoyed doing. There was a reason he bought the pass in the first place. It's made it such a chore. And that's the thing. I think Disney, they got what they wanted by setting up the reservation system, but between merch sales and food sales, the sorts of things that annual pass holders would do when they came to the park. I mean, remember that a lot of annual pass holders would just come to the park and hang out. But they were also the people who bought the limited edition popcorn buckets, or they have a new beignet. I've got to go over to the New Orleans kitchen and try that. And Disney's now looking at those numbers and is like, okay, how do we bring those up? And it's like, well, they have to be able to get into the park to do that.
Yeah, step one, get in the park. Yeah. Exactly. All right, Jim, on to listener questions. Kevin writes in talking about a survey that we discussed last week. He says, I've received the same survey the week before last about the potential for buying add-on purchases in the parks, but I'm a DVC owner and not a pass holder. So this seems to be an exploration of the price tipping point for things like Lightning Lane. My survey started with a price lower than the current price for Lightning Lane and for after-hours events, and then asked about an even lower price if you answered no to the first option. Given that, this survey might be an exploration of the price point that can boost participation and revenue in relation to the cost. So yeah, that could be it. That could be Disney trying to find a good price point for people who have already expressed affinity, would be the DVC members or annual pass holders to the parks. So yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Also, Andrew writes in with this, who says, I am sending in this desperate plea as a vacation planner. I have a one-day park trip for Disney scheduled in less than a month and a half, with no news from the two most recent renovations for Magic Kingdom, Buzz Lightyear and Big Thunder, aside from a spring date. I'm starting to get worried. Do you think Disney would announce an opening a month or less out from the actual date? Or do you think they'll move spring into April/early May? All right. So technically, spring is March through June, right? So spring would be March through June. I don't think Disney would announce an official opening date for something like Big Thunder Mountain Railroad less than a month out from the actual date. Even if they did, we would see test rides running during normal park hours where they're cycling the trains, for 24 hours for at least a few weeks before that. And Jim, we haven't seen that yet, have we?
No, we have not. We have not.
Yeah. I think Disney would announce a reopening date for Buzz that's within a month. But even then, we would hear that cast members would be retrained and rehired or rescheduled for that ride. So they would know first and we would hear about it through then. So, I mean, best of luck, Andrew. I hope it works out for you. Hope at least get Buzz. Right?
I wish we had better news for him, but sorry, Andrew.
All right. And Eddie writes in with this. With the history of dark rides, Disney's balancing spookiness and fun, and the immense popularity of the Haunted Mansion, Tower of Terror, and Mickey's Not So Scary Parties, I was curious if Disney ever considered a spooky-themed resort. I think it would be a big hit. Maybe even a more niche hotel/experience like the Galactic Star Cruiser. Even if this has never been considered as a possible hotel, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts thoughts on the idea? All right, so a couple of interesting things here, Eddie. One is the Haunted Mansion was supposed to be the next thing after the Galactic Star Cruiser, if the Star Cruiser was a success, and I know they got pretty far along with that concept. Also, Jim, I'm pointing out to Eddie, did you know that you can now get married in Disneyland's Haunted Mansion? Did you see this new addition for the weddings and experiences?
Wow. All right.
Yeah. So I put a link to it in the show notes, Disney's official weddings offerings. So Disney says it's hauntingly romantic. Vow to your betrothed before Disneyland Park opens. This legendary estate sets the stage for a one-of-a-kind ceremony and dramatic wedding portraits, and goes on and on. I don't know how much this costs, Jim, but if anyone is getting married soon or can find out for us what this thing is going to cost, it's up to 25 guests. So I'm thinking we're talking about many tens of thousands of dollars here.
There we go. And just a quick aside here, in the early days of the Hollywood Tower Hotel project, there was actually some talk of creating a really for real hotel, with the idea that the ride would be then housed in the abandoned wing of the hotel. And they did trick up some test rooms to sort of like, well, what would, for example, I remember one of the people working on the project talking about how, each of the rooms was supposed to have like a dresser with a hairbrush on the thing. And periodically the hairbrush would begin to spin all by itself there on the dresser.
You can do it too with magnets. Yeah. Just built it into the dresser. Genius. Yeah. I imagine, though, Jim, for soundproofing, each of the hotel room walls would have to be about 3 feet thick.
There we go. Yeah.
Limiting the number of rooms that could actually be in the hotel. Yeah.
That would be a challenge.
All right, Jim, last little bit of news. I found a patent that Disney applied for a couple of weeks ago, and it's titled Ride System Having an Articulated Arm. The images from the patent are in their show notes, and I want to describe it to our listeners who are driving along in their car. So imagine a ride like Dumbo or Magic Carpets of Aladdin, where your ride vehicle is on the end of an arm, and the arm goes up and down. The interesting thing about this patent is the arm itself, in addition to going up and down, now telescopes out, left and right. And Disney's added a couple of interesting options to this. One is that the ride arm itself could have you on what looks to be an off-road motorcycle track, where your arm, right, allows you to go up and down on hills on the ground, but also you can turn left and right and follow left and right tracks, if you will, while the ride is spinning around. And I note, Jim, that the last figure here is of a car that is attached to this ride vehicle. Yeah. And you can see how the car can do jumps on off-road environments. And so, Jim, cars and off-road environments make me think this might be the second small ride for Piston Peak.
Yeah. No, this is a great find. What's kind of intriguing, at least to me, is that I look at this and think, could this be Disney's answer to the Donkey Kong attraction over at Epic Universe?
Yeah, where it's a relatively straightforward ride with a twist around the ride vehicle to make it interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, just the timing of it and the images in it make it seem like this would be a great fit.
I agree.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Jim begins the history of Hollywood Studios' great movie ride. We'll be right back.
They always tell you there's a catch. A compromise, an asterisk. Terms apply. See store for details. May be less than advertised. May vary by mood. Probably. Sprite Zero Sugar? It's different. It's the lemon lime flavored refreshment you want with zero sugar. So, no fast voice? No caveats. Just refreshment. This is Sprite Zero Sugar. Obey your thirst.
And we're back. So, Jim, March is Oscars month, right?
Yeah, in fact, when the show posts, Monday, February 16th, will basically be 1 month out from this year's Academy Awards. Going to be held at the Dolby Theater Sunday, March 15th, and going to be broadcast on ABC for one of the last times. Did you see this news about how starting in 2029, the Oscars are moving to YouTube?
I saw that, yeah. Oh. And isn't ESPN getting a Super Bowl at some point, too? Like, it's a whole new world out here.
It is. But anyway, given the closeness of the Academy Awards, I thought we'd use this as an excuse to talk about the Great Movie Ride. Opening day attraction at Disney's Hollywood Studios. Crazy ambitious. It was housed inside of a 95,000 square foot show building. Featured 50-plus animatronic figures, many of whom were modeled after legendary Hollywood stars John Wayne, Jim Cagney, Gene Kelly. Also, when this thing closed in August of 2017, Len, this was one of the longest attractions on Disney World property. And I'm not talking the length of the track that's, 1,900 feet and change, but rather the overall time length of the thing, 22 minutes. And you know from your time at Touring Plane, Disney doesn't do rides like this anymore. I mean, no. In fact, I think the longest attractions on Disney property now, what is it? American Adventure is 29 minutes, and I want to say Hall of Presidents is 22, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's they don't 12, 13 minutes would be long for a film presentation these days.
Yeah.
Like a ride itself, like 7, 8.
Oh, no. In fact, it's worth noting that when the Great Movie Ride got replaced by Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, I mean, depending on how you count the length of that ride, the physical ride is 5 minutes long, but if you factor in that 2-minute long film that sort of sets up the thing, it's a 7-minute long experience. But, But yeah, that and we're going to do a couple of different installments of the series, folks. Just going to let you know up front, that today we'll talk about early development on the ride, and on future shows we're going to bring in some cast members who actually worked on the attraction back in the day. And I wanted to share this as a tease, Len, that. They're going to talk about how, for example, among the people who worked at the Great Movie Ride were pranksters who would sneak in full charge black bullet blanks from the Jungle Cruise, and then slip these blanks into the bullet bucket of blue quarter charge blanks that were kept backstage at the Great Movie Ride.
Okay, Chip, let me pause here for a second.
Yep.
I don't have a whole lot of experience handling firearms on movie sets.
Yep.
But you would think that if you wanted to differentiate between substantially different amounts of gunpowder in bullets, you would use colors that are a little bit farther apart on the spectrum than black and blue.
There we go.
A yellow, a white, an orange.
Yeah, something along that line, which is why, picture this. You're the poor cast member playing the gangster or the Western bandit, and, sure. you go to shoot your gun during this scene, and the thing makes a noise like a howitzer indoors,
Yeah. I wonder if any cast members ad-libbed the line, what the hell was that? Because I think that would be fun.
There we go. But speaking of the gangster and the Western bandit, that that's honestly one of the most ambitious aspects of the Great Movie Ride back in the day, putting a live performer in there with the animatronics and the physical props. And where did that idea come from? Well, actually, Len, it can be traced back to that theater on Main Street, USA at Disneyland that showed silent films. And as the story goes, Walt was down there one weekend in the early 1960s. And by the way, this is what Walt used to do back in the day. He'd spend his week in Burbank at the studio, supervising production of films and TV shows. But then on Friday night, climb in the car, drive down to Anaheim, park out back, and then climb the stairs behind the firehouse to the Disney family apartment. And then, Walt would then spend Saturday and Sunday at Disneyland, sort of, looking for ways to plus the place. And then on Sunday night, he'd drive home to Lily, drop off his laundry, and then it's like, okay, time to go back to work in Burbank. But and what Walt would do on Saturday and Sunday is he would come down out of the apartment dressed in his grubbies. In fact, that Walt loved the fact that because he wore the suit and the tie on television when he was hosting the Wonderful World of Color show, that when he was in a windbreaker and corduroys, it just that he just sort of mixed in with the crowd. Nobody realized he was Walt Disney. And so he could watch, the crowds and see what they were actually doing. And so, so this is the story that Dick Nunes told me, that it's a Saturday morning and he's sitting there with Walt on a park bench on Main Street, and they're watching people, come down Main Street at the start of the day. And Walt is paying close attention to who's going where. And he mentions to Dick, hey, they're not going into the cinema. They're going into the tobacco store. They're going into the magic store. They're going into the penny arcade. But why aren't they going into, the cinema? And Dick's like, well, Walt, the marquee literally says, this is a movie that shows silent film. And, that's an old fashioned kind of entertainment. Maybe that's why they're not going in there. And it's like, and Walt's like, well, we need to give people a reason to go back in there.
It's funny that you mentioned this, Jim, because our friend Ted Linhart over at DisneyDocs.net has a report from 1964 showing how many people visited every attraction in Disneyland, and I just posted it in the show notes. In the cinema, got 448,995 people in. So let's call it 450,000 just to make the math easy. To put that in comparison, the 450,000 people who visited the cinema were dwarfed by the 785,000 people who took a streetcar on Main Street. So yeah, the omnibus was more popular than the cinema. Yeah, the only thing it's beating is really the fire engine and the Surreys. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's one of these situations where it's like,
no, good call.
And Walt wanted everything in the park to do what it's supposed to be, to entertain folks. So, and so he turns to Dick and said, we have to give them a reason. And he tells a story about when he was a teenage boy, and the Disney family had moved back to Chicago, and there was a movie theater just up the street that was running the John Barrymore version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And in order to boost attendance, they hired a local kid to basically dress up as Mr. Hyde, and he stood under the marquee, and he interact with passersby or entertain people in line, and it was a stunt, obviously, but it worked. They sold more tickets to that engagement of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde than they would have. So, Walt's like, we should do something like that. In fact, here's what we'll do. We'll change the marquee so it says Phantom of the Opera, and then we'll put somebody under, we'll put somebody in a Phantom of the Opera outfit, and we'll have them interact with people going by. And Dick's like, Walt, that's a Universal movie,
Bring me a giant squid costume instead.
There we go. And Walt says, not a problem. I know Jules Stein at MC. I'll give him a call. I'm sure Jules will give us permission to do this. And by the way, MCA acquired Universal Studios in 1959, and that's how Jules Stein wound up as the guy in charge. And he and Walt were great friends. And so, Jules was like, of course. absolutely, sure. You want to
Really?
have, somebody dressed as Lon Chaney in your park? Absolutely. And in fact, my favorite part of this story, Len, is that Walt then invites Jules Stein to Disneyland, and they wind up sitting on the exact same bench where Dick and Walt were sitting, and that these these giants of entertainment are sitting there laughing as tourists are coming up, Main Street USA, and periodically the Phantom of the Opera would come running out of the theater and boo, somebody.
Yeah, because they're just getting the park. They're looking straight ahead,
there we
right?
go. And what was interesting, it was during this visit, supposedly, where Stein is sitting there with Walt, and it says, I'm kind of thinking of doing the same thing at Universal. And it says, same thing? Yeah, they're thinking about, maybe we'll open it for the tour, the thing we used to do in the 20s. And Walt's like, oh, that would be a great idea. And, if I got guys, if you need help with this, I got guys. And in fact, he actually lent to Stein Harper Goff, the gentleman who designed the Jungle Cruise for Disneyland and who did the Nautilus of 20,000 Leagues. Harper actually designed the first set of glamour trams for the Universal, tour out in Hollywood. So, it was very incestuous back in the day. That said, though, when Walt died in December of 66, and remember, Universal gets its own tour up and running July of 1964. Universal waited a discrete amount of time and then reached out to, the managers at Disneyland and said, hey, the Phantom of the Opera, can we have him back now? He's kind of our character, and, we'd like to have him in our theme park. So that's why the Phantom's only in Disneyland from like the early 1960s right up till, say, 66, 67.
Okay. But it worked.
It worked. But more to the point, how do we get from the Phantom of the Opera on Main Street USA to gangsters and bandits in the Great Movie Ride? We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, this.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. Join host Evan Ross Katz on the official podcast for FX's new series, Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, and go behind the scenes with cast and special guests, featuring Sarah Pigeon, Paul Anthony Kelly, Grace Gummer, and Naomi Watts. FX's Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
And we're back. So, okay, we were just talking about 1960s, mid-1960s Disneyland. But if we jump ahead 2 decades, it's now mid-1980s, and Disneyland is getting ready to celebrate its 30th anniversary. More to the point, 6 months earlier, Michael Eisner has arrived as the new head of the Walt Disney Company, and he's looking for ways to shake up the Mouse House. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Disney hasn't been competitive in adult films since forever, and Michael turns around, greenlights production of Down and Out in Beverly Hills, R-rated comedy, directed by Paul Mazursky, stars Bette Midler, Nick Nolte, Richard Dreyfuss, begins shooting May of 1985. It is, a few months later, it's the #1 film in the country, late January of 86. Yep. Television side of the company, Disney has had a hit TV series in years. Somebody slips Michael the pilot script to the Golden Girls. He's like, we're doing this. They get it before the cameras in April of 85. NBC sees the pilot and commits almost instantaneously to putting it in as part of their 1985-1986 lineup. Debut September of that year, immediately becomes a smash hit, and even goes on to win the Emmy that year, Len, as Outstanding Comedy Series. And here are the Disney parks, and they well, we want in on this. We want to be dynamic. We want to do, exciting new things, but we're a theme park, and, theme parks, attractions, they take steel, they take concrete, they take blueprints, they take months, if not years, to get up out of the ground. But at the same time, they want to show the new boss that they can do this sort of thing. And it's at this point that a veteran manager at Disneyland Park goes, now, wait a minute. We used to have that Phantom of the Opera guy down on Main Street, and he used to come running out of the theater, out of the dark of the theater and scare people on Main Street, and everyone would have a good laugh. And, what if we did something like this in the real Haunted Mansion? I mean, put a live performer in there. And just to stress here, Len, Haunted Mansion at this point has been open since August of 1969. So we are, almost 16 years this thing has been operating?
Yeah. And locals know the ride. It's predictable. Right?
They do. They're like, all right, it's props, it's animatronics. I know where every character is in this thing.
Yeah. But what if you didn't?
There we go. So initially they come up with 3 characters. They're going to put 3 live performers in the mansion. And there's the Phantom, who is going to be positioned between the Grand Ballroom and the attic. There was also the Ghoul, who's going to be placed just outside of the attic, where, by the way, where the Hatbox Ghost is today at Disneyland. And then there was the Knight, but we'll get to him in a sec. Anyway, Phantom of the Ghoul quickly becomes obvious they're not going to work. The places that these performers are in are so dark that guests really can't see them. Also, they have a teeny tiny performance space. So by the time the Omni Mover moves through that space, it's just sort of like, was it an animatronic? There just wasn't enough space to differentiate. I am a live performer. I am interacting with you.
All right.
Whereas with the Knight, here's what they did, Len. They put him in the corridor of doors, that space between the endless hallway and the conservatory.
Oh yeah.
And Madame Leota's seance room, and this is a surprisingly large performance space. And what they did is they built an entire suit of armor out of fiberglass. So it's light. It means that the performer can move with this thing. And more to the point, it was created so it would look great from the front, that the entire suit was basically Velcroed to your back. They gave the Knight a full-size, I want to say it was sculpted out of styrofoam, battle axe. All right. And so,
sure.
So here's the thing. These are the very same cast members, by the way, who perform in the parades in the park. But they I want to say anybody who was 5'8" could play this role in the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. That was the size that fit the suit of armor.
Okay, so you've got the track, right? You've got the corridor. Mm-hmm. There's got to be like pressure pads and stuff for.
Well, it's interesting you say that. What's
the logistics of this? Yeah.
Well, this was before intrusion pads. This again. Remember, this is 85. Okay. So, and in fact, the only rules as the performer were, you had to stay on one. You could never cross in front of an Omni Mover. You had to stay on the side closest, just one side of the track, but you could roam the entire corridor of doors. Mm. And by the way, the rule of thumb in this space was you were supposed to startle the guests. You weren't supposed to terrify them.
Right.
In fact, the notion was you couldn't attempt to do this to every Omni Mover. In fact, the veterans in the space would time it, they'd pick every third Omni Mover going through and then do something like move from seemingly I'm a suit of armor standing here in the hallway and suddenly I lunge at you.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing. If you were on the ride that summer, the summer of 85, you would sometimes hear, a scream in front of you and then look at a suit of armor doing nothing. And then, you'd hear a scream behind you. And it's like, what's going on? Yeah. But word quickly got out that there's a live performer in the Haunted Mansion. And in attendance, they saw a surge in wait times because so many people were like, I want to see this guy in action. And it got great response. They were doing guest surveys after the fact, and it's like, oh, we've hit upon something I think people really enjoy here. But sadly, Len, as happens so often in life, a few bad apples, spoil fun for all of us. And it was kind of a combination of cast member behavior and guest behavior, because the other thing was, when you're playing the night for 8 hours, you're standing in a hallway. Yeah. And, there were some people who would get bored. And again, they were specifically told, you could not get within 5 feet of the guest. Yeah. You could do whatever you wanted to startle them, but you had to stay 5 feet away. And there was, for example, one Disneyland cast member who loved to actually jump on the back of the Omnimovers and then reach down into, the thing to startle the guests.
Okay, great effect. However, not part of the rules. Okay.
And more to the point, incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, there's that too, yeah.
If you fell down into the mechanism that moved the Omnimover along, you could become hamburger. Yeah. Also, those that weren't quite that brave, again, would get bored and would step inside of the 5-foot envelope. And as a direct result, there was one cast member who got their nose broken.
Oh, geez.
The humiliating part of this was that evidently it was a teenage girl who was a cheerleader. And, so this guy leans in close to frighten her, and she just draws off and hits him straight in the mask, which, again, it's fiberglass, so it's not metal, so it all goes in and breaks this poor guy's nose.
I mean, cheerleaders are more powerful than you would think, so yeah, all right.
Oh, no, absolutely. The actual athletes, folk, be very cautious. And then, and speaking of, athletes or powerful guys, there was a bodybuilder in an Omnimover with his girlfriend. The knight leans in to frighten them, and it's the guy who reacts poorly. That, first he screams, and then he's embarrassed in front of his girlfriend. So he reaches out and grabs the knight, and he's got him by the front of the suit of armor, and he's now, he won't let go. And he's dragging this poor guy down the corridor of doors, wailing on him. And it was supposedly on the back of that incident that, Disneyland management is like, look, this is a great effect. People really enjoy it. But, I got one cast member with a broken nose and another guy who, won't be coming into work for a couple of weeks. Yeah. It's like, we can't do this anymore, And so this idea gets retired. Much beloved, people still talk about it even today. But the most important part of the story is that Michael Eisner makes his way down to Disneyland and gets to experience this during the summer of '85. And it's like, that is a cool effect. We need to do more of this. And it's not for nothing, folks, that July of 1985 is when we learned that a third theme park is going to be built in Florida, what was then known as the Disney-MGM Studio Tour. And, Michael, as they're finaling, or sussing out ideas for this theme park, mentions, that Disneyland thing, the night in the Haunted Mansion. We need to do that in the big ride for this thing, which, by the way, back then was called Great Moments at the Movies, something in the style of Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln at Disneyland. But Michael's final note is, we need to do something like the night, only make sure that nobody can hit them.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when we continue the story next week, we'll hopefully, again, I've got some cast member friends who are going to share some stories about what it was like to be the gangster and the Western bandit.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But anyway, just again, the path to the Great Movie Ride starts with the Main Street Cinema in Anaheim.
That's fantastic. I'm super excited to hear how this goes, especially from cast members who worked on the ride.
There we go.
All right, folks, that's that's going to do it for the show today. You can help support our show by subscribing over at patreon.com/JimHaleMedia, where we're posting exclusive shows. Our latest show is a live walk through the modern Epcot with me, Jim, and Jim Scholl. And there's a link in the show notes. Speaking of Jim Scholl, on his next Disney journey, veteran Imagineer Jim Scholl visits Disney California Adventure and shares stories and memories of the Anaheim park that started as a car lot. Click on the link in the show notes to get to that. On next week's show, Jim is going to continue the history of the Great Movie Ride. You can find more of Jim at JimHaleMedia.com and more of me, Len, at touringplans.com. Also, we're doing a show called The Case For with Chris Cox. It's a new podcast where Chris, Jim, and I debate one theme park topic at a time, and you get to vote on who's right. There's also a link in the show notes. We're produced spectacularly by Eric Kersey and David Gray. He'll be cooking up flapjacks, hotcakes, griddle cakes, slapjacks, blintzes, blini, and more at the 2026 Kingdom Maple Festival Pancake Breakfast, starting at 8 a.m. on Saturday, April 17th at the St. Johnsbury House, that's on Main Street, in beautiful downtown St. Johnsbury, Vermont. While Eric and David are doing that, please go onto iTunes and rate our show and tell us what you'd like to hear next. For Jim, this is Len. We will see you on the next show.